Hey, my name is Alec, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we jump into what we'll be talking about this week, I have a few things to go over. So, the first thing is that I will be attending Anime NYC as press, which means you'll be able to hear / see some kind of coverage of that here and elsewhere. But on that note, if you are listening to this and you would rather be watching this, as I've said for the past 10 episodes, probably at this point, there is a YouTube channel you can go check out now by the name of Bento Radio, the same name as the podcast, where you can find full YouTube videos for almost every episode. The What I'm Watching episode got taken down because of copyright, but I will also be starting a more centralized hub for everything that I'm doing that I'm interested in on the internet, aka the podcast videos on YouTube, the writings about anime and media that I have been trying to look for a home for, and also the webcomics. So definitely go check that out when I make it a full thing. I will publicize it everywhere I am, including another place you can follow me, which is over on Blue Sky. The links for everything that I'm talking about in terms of YouTube will be on the YouTube page in the description. You can go there and you can click around to your heart's delight and get to the webcomic, get to the podcast if you want to listen to it and you're currently watching it. Get to the podcast in the opposite direction if you're currently listening to it and want to watch it. I encourage you to once again look for me on and the podcast on YouTube. On that note, let's jump into what I want to talk about this week. And this is going to be an odd one because I have something to say about the real world and in style of who I am and the way I process the world. I'm going to do it through anime. And the way I'm going to do that is by talking about a little show over on Netflix called Brand New Animal. So let's throw it to my lovely assistant for a really concise plot synopsis. So take it away with the plot synopsis on Brand New Animal.
Brand New Animal, BNA, is a 2020 anime series produced by Studio Trigger and directed by Yo Yoshinari, set in a world where beastmen, humanoid animals, have revealed their existence to humanity after centuries of hiding. The story follows Michiru Kagomori, a high school girl who suddenly transforms into a tanuki raccoon dog beastman, despite having lived her whole life as a human. Frightened and confused, she flees to Anima City, a special metropolis created as a safe haven for beastmen. There, she hopes to find answers and a cure for her transformation. Upon arrival, she meets Shiru Ogami, a mysterious and powerful wolf beastman who is fiercely protective of beastmen and has a deep hatred for humans due to past betrayals. Though they initially clash, Shiru and Michiru form an uneasy partnership as they investigate the mystery behind Michiru's transformation, which is unprecedented even among beastmen. As they dig deeper, they uncover layers of conspiracy involving unethical experiments, corporate corruption, and hidden truths about beastmen evolution. The biotech company Silvasta Pharmaceuticals emerges as a major antagonist, linked to dangerous research that threatens the survival of both beastmen and humans. At its core, BNA explores themes of identity, discrimination, coexistence, and self-acceptance, with dynamic visuals and fast-paced storytelling characteristic of Trigger's style. Michiru's journey from seeking a cure to embracing her hybrid identity becomes a metaphor for embracing one's uniqueness in a divided world.
With that lovely plot synopsis out of the way, I wanted to actually give you an idea of why I want to talk about this show right now. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about some ugly real world stuff for just a little bit, I promise, but it'll give you context as to where I'm coming from and my thoughts on this show in total. But a couple weeks ago now, at the time of recording this, which is, I think, on August 6th, there was a commercial released by Eagle Jeans. But here in a second why I said American Evil as a clip there. But this commercial more or less does a bunch of dog whistles about over of racism and eugenics and a lot of really nasty stuff. And it stars Sydney Sweeney, and she's got this whole like jeans are blue thing, which is and I didn't know this at the beginning, but like the ad, you can feel it in it of this like eugenics creepiness. Because if you don't know anything about Sydney Sweeney, you can certainly go look her up. I'm not gonna put a picture of her up here because she doesn't need my help on that score. But she's a really good-looking woman. Is a model and actress, and she's done a bunch of controversial stuff kind of leading up to this, but including a wild soap that she sold with her bathwater in it. Bella Delphine. A side note, really interesting article about Bella Delphine and the fact that she got very little of the money she made. I don't know whatever happened to that, but she got very little of the money that she actually made from selling her bathwater ago. And I think it was on The Verge that she detailed, like, I didn't actually get a whole lot of that money, and it got locked up in internet jail for various reasons. It was actually a pretty interesting article, but that aside, ad was gross. Only it's not gross in like a way that or it probably is at the time of this podcast release, out of character for American culture lately. And I'm somebody who pays attention to all that stuff, and I'm somebody who pays attention to kind of cultural vibe of things. And part of the reason I pay attention to that is because I feel like it affects me. There's a saying in the universe that you should never worry about who they're coming for first, because that's really self-centered. But in practice, like, it's pretty common. A lot of people think about the world that way, of like, on the front lines of this, they'll come for me first, blah, blah, blah. And in practice, that helps you, personalizing stuff in that way, helps you, so the other people who are affected by kind of shift of perspective that could be happening around you that makes people feel unsafe and people feel unwelcome and people feel like they don't fit in. And a lot of stuff until the kind of thing that we're in the middle of, once again, at the time of recording this, you could be listening to this way in the future, in which case this will be an interesting cultural document. Any cultural anything is. But up until this point, it felt like a real march of progress. And the reason why that matters to me is I mentioned this in my previous episode, which you can go listen to, all about jobless reincarnation, but I am a physically disabled person. Part of the reason why I'm choosing to present myself through this lovely is because my body doesn't look like yours, most likely. Not that anybody's body needs to look one way or another, but when I first started attempting to do YouTube videos, which I've since taken down because they were not as good as the ones that I'm putting out now, certainly, I got a lot of negative comments about not just my delivery, but my body, and I didn't want to deal with that, if I'm perfectly honest. I didn't feel like I needed to put myself out there in that way. And it's not necessarily because I'm unconfident in the way I look. I think I'm a pretty decent looking person, and I don't think I'm like Banderas hot or something. Insert your Timothée Chalamet or whoever you think of as an attractive guy. I don't necessarily think I'm that, but I have a kind of realistic understanding that, like, I'm not some like gremlin coming up from the grates kind of guy either. but as people think of themselves, but almost never are, because all of that stuff is subjective. But I just didn't want to deal with it. But I am physically disabled. I'm also, in the terms of this conversation, biracial. And I didn't really think about, but like I saw that ad and it had disturbed me. And there's also all of these conversations happening around fashion about how fashion is bending towards being more conservative, and people are witnessing kind of rollback of culture that people feel like is happening around them. And up until the Sydney Sweeney ad, I had noticed that, and it was disturbing to me because I had this feeling that like it would be a roll back and then an advancement in kind of an opposite direction. And one of the things that I've always believed is that with every kind of like forward that the world made, it makes more room for difference. Because this is just a total aside. As a person with a physical disability, you get, no matter how severe or not, you walk through the world and there's a different perception about you. Both negative, as you would think, and positive. A perfect example. I have worked in the creative industry in the creative fields for a very long time. And very often when I was doing more explicitly corporate work, when I was in that environment, I got a lot of looks of like, God, how good must he be to be sitting in the same room with me? Think of it as kind of, you see an anime character who's clearly a badass. People would look at me like that. Now, was I necessarily that? Probably not. But that perception was there because they saw in me a inherent disadvantage that I had removed from the board to be standing in the same room as them, who had done all the same things, but somehow in seeing me might have thought or might have known they'd done less than I had to do. A positive version of that, by the way. There's lots of things about pity and about, all that stuff that is baked in with being physically disabled. Now, in a slightly similar respect, being biracial is also an interesting way to go through the world, because as I talked about to friends oftentimes, I'm in reality half black, half white. I'm about the color of my avatar on a snowy day. On a sunny day, on like summer, like it is at the time of recording this in August, I am like coffee with milk in it. Brown. And I've got the division on my palms. You got the classical African American traits, but not necessarily all the melanin, because once again, I am mixed race. And oftentimes to white people, I am just not white. But to black people, I am black. And that conflicts with the way I see myself, because I don't see myself in either direction. And I encourage anybody who's biracial to not feel like you need to see yourself in either direction. Because unless you want that for yourself, if you have that, if you were dealt that card in your hand in terms of the cards you are dealt, you have a right to express yourself however you want. You don't need to feel like you need to fit somebody's predefined box like that. And anybody who is thinking of people or mixed race in one direction or another, I encourage you to kind of people define themselves, because we have that right to do so. And then after the Sydney Sweeney stuff, and the Sydney Sweeney stuff is, I'm sure, still raging. It's still finding new heights of like badness. Came a Dunkin Donuts ad. And if you haven't seen the Dunkin Donuts ad, you can go find that one too. And it brings up good genes in the same ad, in much the same way. And it occurred to me that this was part of that shift that's happening. That, like, I don't even call it that like word shift, because that's what is defined as in America is like in Democrat, blah blah blah, progressive, and but it's not even really a conservative thing, because as much as people want to believe, lots of conservative ideas want to believe that there's that fundamental truth of like they used to be more white, or the other thing, or like invaders to their country. Those people have always been there. It's just how they've been treated, and society has felt about that treatment. Also, a real native, and I'm talking about anime, that a version of animation and an art form that comes from a country with a real nationalistic, many times boring, not even boring, but actually xenophobic view of the world. There is a lot of racism and bigotry in Japan and East Asia and everywhere in the world. UK is notoriously xenophobic. And somebody who is mixed race, who is othered, I wanted to talk about a show that tried to deal with that and tried to celebrate it. And the thing that I've always thought about Brand New Animal, abbreviated BNA, see, I got back to it, is that it is having a conversation about being specifically mixed race, and about racism and prejudice, and trying to build a place where people who feel that heavily are protected. And the show opens kind of over the head with that message by showing you the main character, Michiru, being hunted by a gang of hooligans who want to catch her and beat her to death. It's not subtle at all. They want to catch her and beat her to death. And she's saved by a character named who kind of up and brings her to like capital of the world called Anima City, and is a place specifically made for the protection and the of beastmen. And in this show's world, and this is a Trigger anime, and it looks and feels it, believe me. It's got a great opening, great ending. It's animated beautifully. Beastmen are people who can transform into like versions of animals. Think like waste animals. And in Michiru's case, she is a tanuki. And also in her case, she can't completely transform back and forth. And there's a lot of like attempts and poking at the idea of racism and the like in anime. And a lot of it doesn't marry perfectly one-to-one. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, well, yeah, they're afraid of beastmen, they can turn into werewolves and kill them pretty easily. Like, in the first episodes of this show, you encounter a lion guy who's just so big and so terrifying and has lion claws and a lion face that he can bite and kill you with. And the thing I would say here is that a lot of that is, yes, not a one-to-one, but it shouldn't be a one-to-one, because a lot of that is pretty akin to the nightmare stuff that people are told that bring them to being racist. So, I'm going to talk about jobless reincarnation here for a second, as just to illustrate an idea. In jobless reincarnation, there's a race of people, the race of demons, who are essentially people who function differently and live for much longer lifespans and have different characteristics. Oftentimes are beast people, like in this show. There's a notorious guy who's a horseman, a horse head. There are like pig heads and like roll the dice of put together the parts of animals and humans, and you got a demon in Mushoku Tensei. But there is one race of demons that everyone's afraid of. And the reason that people are afraid of them is, yes, in reality, something bad happened there. But essentially, on a mass scale, real Mandela effect like, world has been manipulated to fear this particular race of people to such an extent that this race of people has green hair. And if you have green hair, which is possible for other, including elves, and as in the main story, a character named Sylphie has green hair, you are essentially seen as terrifying and picked on and bullied mercilessly until you go away or die. And what you find out in the story in like a convoluted way is that the entirety of the world of Mushoku Tensei has been manipulated to believe that these people are dangerous at their core, and that is non-negotiable. But the first thing the show does is show you a character named Ru, who is, yes, incredibly strong, yes, incredibly powerful and terrifying when he needs to be, but is also incredibly kind and incredibly, and he has this soft spot for children that is like ceasing and non-negotiable. Like, you are a kid, he is there to protect you. And they treat that character almost in a way that's saint-like. They use him as an introduction to the idea that, like, that's not a matter of, like, ones and bad ones. It's not a matter of he's one of the good ones or he's one of the bad ones. It's a matter of the perception has been altered by an outside party so badly that everyone believes the story, that everyone believes the myth. Like, the idea that this is something similar in our world, in that notoriously women of color do not get treated as fairly by doctors as everybody else. That, all kinds of like awful rumors, you can probably hear them in your head about people of other races. And we all engage in these stereotypes on some level. And to some degree, those stereotypes can be useful storytelling tools, but they're not inherently good things. And when you see those kinds of like congruous, quite fit the mold, or doesn't quite fit the way that people talk about race or race relations or racism in reality, because they're creating a clear danger. One of the things you should know is at some point, people felt a clear danger from people, from Asian people, from Indian people. People feel that way, even still oftentimes. Great clip of Liam Neeson, because Liam Neeson, a member of his family, I believe, assaulted at the very least by for lack of a better word, a black guy. And he talks about the fact that, like, he first saw a black person after that. He had this, like, kind of anger in him. And he paused, and he's like, wait, that's not right. Like, in him was like, this isn't okay. Like, I shouldn't feel this towards everyone just because there was a roll of the dice they couldn't control. That's not the thing that made this person do this to someone I deeply care about. But he said that he walked around with a lot of shame and having those thoughts, and that he like feels badly about it. In the same vein, these kinds of biases and bigotry are all connected. They all come from a place of fear of the unknown, of fear of the possibility of something terrible. Again, and I'm thinking about this a lot because I've been listening to light novels because I can't help myself, and I'm in a place where I want to like something to distract me from the universe, as I think we all are. Universe is giving me reason to talk about racism in an anime podcast. But Mushoku Tensei, they have this idea of like children and blessed children, and basically these are people who are born with unique characteristics and abilities that very few other people have. And that's a pretty good explanation for what it's like to be born with a physical ailment of some kind as a kid. Because as a disabled kid, and not only as a disabled kid, but as a kid who was a childhood cancer survivor, I was given a wide berth by people. Not necessarily because they pitied me, but because me being around reminded them that there were terrible things in the world. And I didn't have control over that, because I obviously didn't get to pick the cards that were dealt to me on the way into the world. I just got what I got. And that is true of anybody, of any race, of any persuasion at all. So when you see these incongruous things of like, black guy's a lion, of course you should be afraid of him. Well, no. That's not the way it works. He didn't choose to be a lion. Nobody in this show chose to be a beast person, and Anima City was built as a haven because people deserve to live life without being hunted, without being hated, without being feared. You deserve to. There's a great shot. There's great shots of city, and this shows versions of brands, and there's a shot of a street with a Subway in like the corner of the shot, and all I thought was like, deserve to go get a Subway sandwich and like not get the side eye. Like, want to pretend, this isn't the right way to say this, but everybody wants, or equivalency when it comes to races. But the best version of that looks like when it truly does not matter who or what you are, you can do anything. When it doesn't matter if you're white or black, you can just go through the world, and it feels the same for everyone. And we are certainly not there yet. But the maintaining of Anima City was built to help beastmen in this world, different race in this world, in this show's world, to just go out and get breakfast, just enjoy a day with the family, just be, and not feel like you needed permission to just be. A show that I'll probably bring up a lot in this podcast is a show called Static Shock. Because Static Shock was not content unless it was trying to undo the harms of the world. Like F3, they had a whole thing about how a main character's dad is just racist. And they drag you through that episode, and they make that episode deal with that. And they make the characters in the show deal with that. But there's another great episode where Virgil, the main character, goes to Africa. And when he's in Africa, he's talking to his friend, who's the aforementioned main character whose dad was racist. I forget the name. But he's like, Richie is the character name. He's like, Richie, it's incredible. I'm not black here. I'm just a kid. Just Virgil. It's not, the racial component of me doesn't matter. I can have this kind of freedom that's not contextualized by that. And that's really a beautiful thing because, like I said at the beginning of this, when I walk into a room, white people know I'm not white. They might take stabs at what I am. But black people peg me as black. And my friends can attest to this. They've probably seen it happen. My mother, who's white, has walked around with me as a kid and would get the nod constantly as a kid. And people would be like, really? She's like, no, yeah, he gets it constantly. Now he just knows to do it back. And that can be described, and is in many ways, access to a culture that is rightfully your own, but it's also this defining thing that you didn't choose to define you. Especially when, once again, I am biracial, there is so much more to me. There's more to me than my race, than my body, and part of my making this YouTube channel is expressing that. But when you can feel like that is, all that artifice is stripped away and you can just be you, that is what we should all be driving towards. And that will take a much longer time and is a much bigger project than I think so many people realize. And in Brand New Animal, the thing of Anima City is described as an imperfect solution because it creates this clear line of demarcation where people are accepted and are understood, but people who are not beast people, I don't believe are allowed in city limits. And so much of the show is really kind of spur it into plot with Michiru's, I believe it's Nazuna, who is like a wolf girl. And the idea is that both Michiru and Nazuna, although definitely more Nazuna than Michiru, were turned into beast people. And a lot of the show is about them coming to terms with that and coming to terms with their new reality and what that looks like and what that means. But Michiru doesn't have this, like, to be thought of as a beast person or as not a beast person. She just wants to be thought of as her. And it's the best explanation that I've ever heard of being stuck in between those two worlds, so to speak. And if you're looking for something that feels progressive and something that feels like it's talking about dangers and violence of racism in a close to even in a close to intelligent way, although I think this show it really goes to bat for the idea of like racism and creating a better world. Brand New Animal certainly does that. Once again, there is some muddiness there. There will always be some muddiness unless you're talking directly about racism. And one of the things about both Tensei and Static Shock, which I think you can find Static Shock on HBO Max still, but they're doing a whole cartoon purge over there, which is very bad. You definitely find it somewhere. But the big thing with the conversation about that is it is nuanced, and you should feel like you can be yourself, no matter what color you are. And no matter what size, what shape, all of that stuff doesn't matter. And there's this allowing for preferences that I don't think is healthy. Like people who love to date people, or white people, or Asian people, or whatever. And in those revealed preferences, I think we should do more interrogation of that, because so much of Brand New Animal is about to carve out your place in a world where you feel very othered. And that is like Michiru's kind of arc throughout the show. But when you have those preferences, you're not just limiting the amount of people you can date. You're saying to people who you're not willing to date, you're not up to snuff. And even if that's not your intention, even if it truly is just a preference, you're saying that that person isn't worth your time. You're saying that that short king isn't even worth you getting to know because they're not a 6 foot tall, model-esque guy. Not that all 6 feet tall people even are that. Quite often, being taller than about 5'7" to 5'9" makes it very hard to find clothes. Especially in countries where like significantly shorter. See Europe or Asia, for example. Those reveal those preferences are also like a learned form of that bigotry. Of that, of like, tall guys are protectors, not necessarily. People are weak, not necessarily. And so much about this show plays both sides of that coin. Like, yeah, kind of the reason why they present both Michiru and Nazuna as a fox perspectively is because in Japanese culture, both tanuki and kitsune can transform. They are kind of this spiritual being that can assume any form. And in Michiru's case, she's a tanuki who is well known to like put the leaves on their heads and transform. In Nazuna's case, she is a fox spirit. She is a kitsune, a fox spirit, and they can also transform and are oftentimes seen as tricksters and playful and all of this other stuff. Even in the animals even in their animal forms that they can be, they are not finite. They're not definable by what you see because they could be anything that they choose to be, even if they don't know how to do it at the time you meet them. It's seen in Michiru's case, she can change like a tanuki. Same thing with Nazuna. And I'm leaving out a freedom fighter character here. who I want to talk about now, and that's he's like the White Wolf character. And he's this like character who has lived for, I think in the show it said that he's like for hundreds of thousands of years, and he's been fighting for beast people for all of that time. And the show says pretty clearly, like, you're fighting and protecting beast people, and you fight and protect Anima City. But at some point, this is all going to have to coalesce, and everybody's going to have to come together and be one world, one people. The end of the Michael Jackson song, Black or White. And he's shown to have incredible animus towards humankind for obvious reasons. And to dive back into the uncomfortable universe right now, in the whole war in Gaza with Israel and Gaza at both ends, although really at this point it is Israel as the aggressor and the bully killing a people. A thing that people don't want to believe is real is that if you stamp on the heads of people and you try and remove them from the board, you just won't. You try and do a horrific thing like a genocide, you will not succeed. It just won't happen. Because you would have to be so exacting, so deeply cruel and unparalleledly thoughtful as to wipe a people out of existence. That would, A, be horrifying and horrible. And if you perpetrate that or want to perpetrate that, you should face the cruelest punishment possible. But also, probably not gonna do it. Because people have the freedom of movement and travel in most cases. And also, anyone who's left alive will become this, like, hateful, angry thing that you see in Ogami. Ogami has seen for hundreds of years the cruelty of humankind against beast people, and he's this, like, protector and aggressor when necessary. And that reminds me of the end of a show that I love, and that is very widely regarded as one of the best Gundams, Iron-Blooded Orphans. At the end of that show, the kind of Tekkadan, the like kids that Tekkadan was protecting because they were, into like the kind of servitude that was happening on Mars, in terms of like forced into like wage labor. Happening for the company that Tekkadan grew out of, those kids become terrorists. They become like a stain that the world has to reckon with and has to deal with. And Cadelia, at the end of that show, is like, hey, keep an eye on those kids. We're the ones who fucked this for them. Like, the current generation has created this generation of nightmare children who deserve to hate us because we didn't do it right. And in the show's kind of is what that looks like when it grows up. You want to figure out why someone became a terrorist. You want to figure out why someone becomes a bad person. Look at what happened to them when they were younger. Talk about this in, again, my Jobless Reincarnation from last week. But look at Rudius's younger life. He was a good kid until he was tortured he was tortured and beaten, essentially, and not even bullied, tortured and beaten, and strung up naked on the school gate. He was, like, some horrific shit happened to him in his life. And that caused him to spiral. It caused him to be permanently depressed and despondent and become the kind of person that only the worst environments can produce. And they show you that brutality in the beginning of the show, and I assume light novels. I picked up where the show left off with the light novels in that case, but because I didn't want to experience the written version of what that show shows you at the very beginning of its first season. Because they are very descriptive in the light novels, and I didn't want that in my brain a different way. I already had it in my brain the way the show does it. But you want to know why people hate other people. The answer is probably in the past. All sides. in terms of racism, it's a lot of deep-seated, deeply negative, and fucked up stereotypes that coalesce into people's views on other people. The nicest person you say some real racist shit. And the way I know that is the nicest person you say some real ableist shit. But in that opposite direction, that kind of will act as a mold to people eventually. And I can guarantee you the people committed the atrocities on October 7th that kicked off, the Israeli, Gaza were wronged by them in the past. Strip was not a beautiful, incredible place to be to begin with. What did people think was going to happen? Animal, it's made explicit that, yes, terrified of beastmen, but yes, also beastmen could mean, who's a chipmunk or a dude who's just a giant lion man. But the monster is someone that the humans who has witnessed the bigotry and the violence of humans on his race for centuries. At least 4, probably more. And I don't think that people think about racism like that. I don't think that people think about the domino effect of that. About the fact that, if you are bigoted enough to kill someone or to, not even kill someone, but to make someone suffer because of something they have no control over, and make them suffer for long enough, they will come to have hatred for you and your kind. It's a never-ending cycle. And a lot of Brand New Animal's point is, we need to have some way to break this cycle. We need to have some way to be just chill and cool with each other. And to get to a place where it doesn't matter that you're who's also a ferret. Or in the show's parlance, who's also a ferret is also just a black lady. The beast people that they show you, with the exception of Shiro, are people of color. Are people of different races. Very clearly. And I think they're doing that on purpose because they like to have the conversation. And, nothing new to Trigger as a studio. It's its first smash hits was Kill la Kill, which is all about the power, which on one level is all about the power of fashion and fashion as a tool to repression. And surprise, surprise, come all the way back around to this American Eagle ad that made me want to talk about another Trigger show. This is about racism and bigotry and the whole 9 yards. I said at the beginning of this, from a culture that has a lot of nationalism and has a lot of, its own kind. And Japan is currently experiencing this, very anti-foreigner-ness thing. And that's happening all over the world. But we can't do this without each other. We never could. Is that we're all in this together. And if you're making somebody else's life miserable because of something they have no control over, what the fuck is the matter with you? So I'm going to end this kind of reflection on fandom past. The first time Emperor was elected is the way I'll use that. I'll start from the Otaku's Anonymous podcast. I didn't come up with that, so I won't take credit for it. The first time that happened, one of the most popular shows of that season, of the year of 2016, was a show called Tanya the Evil. And that show still bothers me to this day, because what it's trying to do is make a character who's inherently evil. And kind of root for her. For I'm going to use the word them because it is an adult man transported into the body of a small child. But that small child exists in a fantasy version of Nazi Germany. And so you're following a Nazi. And the show's trying to tell you that she's evil, that you shouldn't be rooting for her. But it also glorifies her and gives her, kind of and truly talented and all this other stuff. And just the celebration of that character did not give me hope for the world for a long time. And I've taught this on Blue Sky, where you can go follow me. But I want to give people the benefit of the doubt to have the necessary literary, to like pull cotton candy apart and like be able to separate the parts, because it didn't seem like it was happening when that show first aired. And people can read things all kinds of different ways. Media is a thing that you learn over a long time, and a lot more people than you realize don't have it. And so I appreciate things like Brand New Animal that just beats you over the head. That's just like, hey, I know what you've been heard. I don't know what people have told you, but racism, pretty bad. And here's a laundry list of reasons why. Starting with indiscriminate beatings of people who don't look like you. If that seems bad, it's because it is. We're going to make these people into like faceless guys. And we're going to attempt to have a complex conversation around the concept. And I really appreciate it for that. On that note, this is where I'm going to end it, actually. If you like the podcast, new episodes come out every day. You can either listen to it in your podcast player of choice, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. If you can hear me right now, you can subscribe to me in some way, basically. You can also go watch the podcast over on YouTube, where if you're not watching me right now, you can, once again, as I said in the very beginning of the show, go to YouTube and search for Bento Radio. The channel should come up. But you can also follow me over on Blue Sky or Instagram or a bunch of different places. And until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I will talk to you later.